The conversation actually began as a question of space utilization and having a quality work environment for employees. Dr. Elba Garcia kind of championed an effort to make sure that our employees had a great place to work.
One of the first things that I did was ask the staff for a building space study. So after the study came back, it was not a surprise that we have a lot of space, we just weren't utilizing it correctly. The main recommendation was that we should start with the records building. It was in the heart of downtown. It was an integral part of what is the West End. We have over 600 employees in this building. So the committee felt that it was important that the employees and the Dallas County stay in downtown Dallas.
What we're going to be doing is making a modern amenity out of 3 old buildings that will knit together so that they're fairly seamless. And we'll preserve some of that historical significance of the buildings and that sense of history for those who visit and work here. But at the same time, it'll be modern, first-class office space.
The Dallas County Records Building Complex is comprised of 3 buildings. The first is a 1914 Dallas Criminal Courts and Jail building. And then in 1928, the building behind me, which is a Gothic revival style, is the Records Building. So all of the physical records that were in Old Red were moved into this building. And in 1955, they added an annex to the building. So those are the 3 building components that comprise the entire Records Building complex.
Walking inside of it, the floors are uneven because they were not matched together very well at all. But the idea that you really couldn't then begin to separate them either because it had become one building.
The daunting challenge would be you have 3 buildings with their own unique architectural perspective, and how do you bring those 3 together to create one cohesive facility?
I think the most important space is the lobby and the 2nd floor of the Criminal Courts Building. The Criminal Courts Building was built in 1914, and that lobby is marvelous. You come up, a grand stair from Commerce Street. It's white marble, the lobby tile flooring, and the ceiling is ornate, and it has this wonderful, grand staircase that leads you up to the 2nd floor, where there's 2 spectacular original courtrooms.
The favorite spot that I have in the complex is coming up the grand staircase in the Criminal Courts Building, because it does take you back to when everything wasn't purely efficient, and realize that you are part of a life that is a little bit bigger than you are, that involves a lot more people and maybe some bigger ideas.
In 1928, the county commissioned the Records Building. The 6-story structure is in a different style but sits adjacent to the Criminal Courts Building. Of course, over time they filled up the building. In 1955, the county again decided to complete the block and construct the annex building. The annex connected the Records Building and the Criminal Courts Building, and that gave the current Records Complex, which fills the whole block.
The old jail is just fascinating. The history in this old jail is just fascinating. Tragic history, but nevertheless history that occurred right here in this building. Clyde Barrow being here, Jack Ruby not only having his trial here, but also being housed here for 3 years. It's just a fascinating history. So, the challenge here is to preserve as much of that as we can, and not forget it and not lose it during the construction period, and also, 100 years from now, as people are remembering the work that we did, that we really took that into account.
The catwalk is the old systems that they had back then, where you could walk on this ramp and be able to see several levels below and maybe even a little above. Remember, they were overcrowded, and there was often stuff going on in there that you needed to stop. So they would get on the catwalk and they would walk all around and be able to see. The reason it's called a catwalk is you creeped in to see what was going on.
The Dallas County Criminal Courts building that was constructed in 1915 was considered to be a real landmark. For instance, it was called at the time a skyscraper jail, 6 floors above the ground. And so no one was expected to escape from that jail. However, about 2 weeks after the jail had opened, the first escape occurred when a young inmate tied together sheets and dared to climb out the window and get down to the floor, then raced into the Trinity River bottoms and disappeared from view.
The jail structure will be systematically removed. It's going to be a very difficult process, and some will be preserved so that we know and remember how it was once. There's been no activity in that jail for the last 25 years. So we're really taking something that's not utilized and putting core county functions in that space. We absolutely plan to give homage to the old jail, and it occupied such a great part of the facility for so long. But to carry things over and last for another 100 years, we need to reuse that space.
The expectation is very high. Let's face it, this is the biggest project that the county has done, in the history. After building these 3 units in the records building, they're more than 100 years old. And like Forrest Gump said, life is like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get. One of the things that this project includes is not only preserving the facade, but also preserving a lot of the different architectural entities that are here inside the building, to have that sense of the past in a very modern building.
Just so much history when you talk about the records building. And when you know what the records building historically has meant in the African American community. A few years ago, we began a number of renovation projects, and I began discovering a lot of white-only signs, which I would expect in any of the old buildings in Dallas. And so as a result, we kind of set a course to try to preserve that, not without a lot of controversy. The records building is a part of Dallas County history.
I think it's important to tell the story. Dallas County has a fascinating history, not only for, people of color, but for whites and for anybody who, lives here.
I think the combination of modern office space and these historic buildings on the site where Dallas County has been for 150, 160 years is a commitment to not only recognizing the past, but moving forward with the future.
If anything else, we had a little piece in the history of Dallas in preserving this building, not only for ourselves, but for the next generations to come.
Working in a 100-year-old building is like that big exhaust pipe right behind you. We found a diamond ring in the bottom of it when we cleaned it out. Now, where did it come from? It's a smokestack. So who stuck a diamond ring down the smokestack? This boiler right here that we're looking at, this was new technology when I got here. To maintain the boiler without any controls, you had to do it by hand. The trick was, and it was just an art, just to get everything balanced just right to where you only made little tiny tweaks on it. Love to fix things. I love to take this old equipment and then just basically just put new gaskets in it and restore it, sandblast it, and get it all back together and repaint it, and it looks like it never was touched, but it still works great. I mean, I love my job so much that I could not leave the place. I mean, I'd call back on vacations time and time again just to make sure everything's okay.
I've been doing a building mechanic job for 20 years. Building mechanic is responsible for every aspect of the building, from fire systems to electronics to plumbing, air conditioning, electrical, does it all. We had a flood back in 2010 on Memorial Weekend, on Memorial Night. An 8-inch water main from the city broke. The water level reached up to this point, which ended up being roughly about 1.2 million gallons of water, and we had our hands full. Preservation would mean a lot, that there's certain aspects of it that does need to be preserved due to the fact of the nature of all the people who's been in here, whether it be jail or public or elected official or whoever. This building has a lot of history. We have a lot of space available that we could be utilizing that has been gone to waste for 30 years or more. And it's about time we need to reutilize the space that we have, and it's long overdue for a remodel. As far as I know, everything in here is going to be gutted all the way down to the shell, and everything that you see will be gone and will be replaced with new stuff. We'll be able to have a new automation system where the building will actually run itself.
This was the women's chapel. I can imagine the women just touching the wall for some kind of hope that they would get out of this place and get a better life. They almost vibrate on you. It's history. The history of Dallas is also the history of this jail. The side of history we don't like so much is in here. So there was the other side of history. There was some hangings here. The concept that somebody was hung stays with you. It's our history that we don't like, but it's still our history.
We're in the death cell area of the old jail. This jail was built in 1913 and 14 and opened in 1915. There's 3 death cells. Inmates here were waiting their execution. They were given their food, medical attention here, and they would be walking this way as they went to the gallows. This is the area where the executions were held. Sheriff Dan Harston had a gallows built here, had 3 trap doors. In 1918, there were 3 inmates hung here: Walter Stevenson, Leonard Dodd, and Will Jones. In 1920, Green Hunter was hung here, and Fred Douglass was the last one hung in 1920. During the executions, there might be 200 to 250 spectators watching the execution.
I do regret that that beautiful jail is going to be torn down. And it's funny for anybody to say beautiful jail, but I had been there for so long and worked in it. Many memories. They used to call it the hot box. They would put people in there and they would turn this heat lamp on as punishment, and they would stay there until sweat came out from the bottom.
I wasn't here when all this was happening. And so it's difficult to think that human beings, some of them unjustly, were treated like this. No, I don't believe in hotels and concierge and all of that stuff. But I do believe that human beings have emotions and feelings. You treat somebody as a human being, they will behave as a human being.
The old jail, built in 1915, had been a very safe jail, probably one of the safest jails that we had. It had all the amenities that I guess that we needed as jail administrators to run it. The major problem that it had was it wasn't air conditioned, and it did get hot in there. The discipline part was discontinued because of Judge Sarah T. Hughes' court order.
Sarah Hughes was noted especially and became internationally famous for the famous photograph of her swearing in LBJ on November 22nd, 1963, in which you see LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, being sworn in as president. Accompanying him, of course, Lady Bird Johnson and Jackie Kennedy in the bloodstained dress. This is the 14th District Courtroom, and Sarah T. Hughes presided in this courtroom from 1955, when the building, Records Annex building, was completed, until she was named federal district judge in 1962. This is the courtroom where there were no women jurors until 1954, so she presided over all men jurors. You can see the jury box and the benches at the back, which are still just as they were. People in Dallas County tended to think of jails as places where we punished prisoners for their misdeeds. Well, Sarah T. Hughes, who by now had been appointed a federal district judge, had a different attitude. She had been a policewoman in Baltimore, and she favored rehabilitation. She thought jail is a good opportunity to rehabilitate these people.
It was in 1979. Sarah T. Hughes called me on the phone about 5 o'clock. And she told me to clear out 5 single cells or a cell that would hold 5 people. And I asked why. She says, well, I have warrants that I'm signing right now for the arrest of all of the commissioner's court. And I said, well, what is this? She says, well, Judge Sterrett was on television. He called me that wicked old woman. Said he wasn't going to comply with what he had agreed to. And so I'm just going to put them all in jail.
There's a lot of pressure on the court that I've sat on to build a new jail. In fact, there was a lawsuit filed against the county. And Sarah T. Hughes, God bless her, was the presiding judge over that lawsuit.
It was crowded, overcrowded. Conditions were very tough. There were several riots in the jail. And Sarah T. Hughes started giving certain orders that infuriated the populace. She ordered color TV sets for the inmates. That's when color TV was new. And gosh, color TV sets for prisoners, that seemed so odd to most people. She ordered better food for them. She required them to have recreational facilities. She wanted TV instruction so that you could gain a high school diploma right there in jail if you were there long enough.
I had known Sarah T. Hughes because she swore me in when I became an attorney. So I had the background with her. She knew where to push my button. In fact, we get a phone call when all this controversy was going on about building a new jail to get to her chambers. And I don't know how many folks have ever been to a federal judge's chambers, but they're real royal. I mean, they're big. And she sat down and began to tell me, and the rest of the court really, this is what you are going to do. You're going to have air conditioning. You're going to have colored TVs. You're going to have a basketball court, etc. And she just laid it all out. And of course, the citizens of the county, they weren't up to that at the particular time. And she looked directly at me, straight into my eyes, and said, and David, if you don't do this, you're going to be the first one to go to jail.
The county judge, the county commissioners were very much opposed to what she was doing. Finally, she ordered the construction of a new jail, one we now have, the Lou Sterrett Jail.
Sarah T. Hughes was a remarkable woman. She actually, in Taylor versus Sterrett, which was the court order, or the case that she had, it really transformed the jail. It made it possible for us to bring in programs. It improved the medical conditions, all the ways that prisoners were housed, square feet that were necessary. We also had the very first GED program and testing in a jail, and this was ordered by Judge Hughes. There were just so many different criticisms in the paper and editorial cartoons, and I think I was called the chief coddler. There was a dramatic drop in the number of assaults, both physical and sexual assaults within the jail. She did an awful lot, and she was a wonderful lady.
Everybody finds Jesus when they come to jail. And I don't know if it's a fear or a cry for help. So they made an area where the prisoners could get baptized. So they brought the tub in and just made arrangements so that people who found Jesus and wanted to change their lives and wanted to go a different direction could get baptized right here. What's wrong with that? That's a beautiful thing. In a jail to find some hope. So you had a baptism, and the inmates wanted to beautify it. I don't know what it is about jail, but there's always artists. I guess it's just a percentage of people always end up being artists, and they do the background to the baptismal so that when somebody was baptized, they could see something other than the jail.
The old jail is just fascinating. The history in this old jail is just fascinating. The first female killed in the line of duty happened right here. The shooting that occurred in the old jail of the deputy that was killed. Just some of that, tragic history, but nevertheless history that occurred right here in this building.
Deputy Willis Champion was escorting a prisoner back to his tank. When he got to the tank and opened the door, two prisoners, Sidney Welk and Charles Gaines, attacked him, shot him in the stomach. He fought his way back with them, fought their way to the window in the picket, and threw his keys out the window, preventing their escape. The elevator trustee heard what was going on, went to the ground floor, and notified other officers. 6 deputies came up from the ground floor, and there was a shootout. Sidney Welk was shot and wounded under the stairwell. Charles Gaines was shot and killed hiding behind this control box. 2 bullet holes up in the air duct here, which shows a shootout. Another bullet hole in the windowsill over here. Willis Glover Champion was the first deputy sheriff of Dallas County killed in the line of duty in the jails. We're on floor 6M in the old jail. This room here was Jack Ruby's bathroom facilities. This room was Jack's small cot with a mattress, blanket, and sheets. Jack had a small table here. There was 2 chairs, one for Jack and one for the deputy. This mezzanine area was open. Jack had access to this. He liked to draw, and he also did watercolor paintings. He liked to read the Sunday newspapers. He did yoga, and there was a deputy with him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right in this area. The food was prepared up in the kitchen and brought down by the chef. He ate the same food as the deputies did. Jack was given this special treatment, guarded by a deputy 24 hours a day because they didn't want to take a chance on anybody hurting him. I guarded him at Parkland Hospital. Would have been a week before he died. I just relieved the guard out there for a short time, 1 hour.
I remember just right behind us here, the elevator having Mr. Bowie, who was the elevator operator, and as a youngster coming to Dallas, this is where I began my Dallas County career over 40 years ago. Just so much history when you talk about the Records Building, and when you know what the Records Building historically has meant in the African American community. We called it Hatch, Match, and Dispatch. Hatch is where the birth certificates were, Match is where you married up, and dispatch is when you left here. So it's a lot of history here. I had seen the whites only sign embedded into the marble, and I wanted to preserve it. And then there was this wonderful young lady that appeared before the court and said, hey, I'll take the project on, and she did, and it just evolved.
The centerpiece of the project is Drinking Fountain number 1, which is the interactive monument right here. I think it's important that they're deciding to keep this installation as well as the artifact because it's sort of symbolic. It's like a scar on the body that's slowly fading away from the naked eye. And once we sort of have an artistic intervention in it, we can heighten sort of the trace that will always be there. Even when we can't see it, we can add lighting and things to it to be able to pop it out. And so just like the history that we're talking about, it'll always be with us like a scar is in the body, but over time it fades and becomes part of the fabric of who we are as a society. It was an interesting opportunity to address the history. And so I disagreed with the people that thought we should just remove it. Being in the actual space, you're able to imagine what this place potentially would have been 60 years ago, 100 years ago, and what people like my great-grandmother would have experienced having to literally pass by these places, right, these sites of segregation, and sort of have to ignore it to continue on to like be a human, you know? And so being in its context was really powerful for me.
The vestiges, are still here. And these buildings represent that. The Records Building is a part of Dallas County history. It's no different than the cabin that is next door. Regardless of where it's located, it tells its own story. And I think this building will do the same.
The project is a combination of old and new. The county has decided, which is fabulous, to reuse and preserve these historic buildings, put their county employees back in those buildings, but in a modern environment. So I think the combination of modern office space and these historic buildings on the site where Dallas County has been for 150, 160 years is a commitment to not only recognizing the past, but moving forward with the future.
This county has been a place that has chosen reason and compassion over fear and demonizing of each other. I'm very proud of our present, but we cannot forget our past.
The history of this three-parted one building does have a racial history, a very strong racial history of when it was created. Have we come a long ways? Have things changed since then? Might be questions that I think we are still dealing with very, very strongly across the United States as we speak today.
I think we've come a long way. I think we have a long way to go. I still believe we do, but in terms of where Dallas County was and where Dallas County is now, right now we have staff. The majority of my department heads are people of color. 20 years ago you wouldn't have seen that. We have Commissioner's Court right now that's very diverse. 30 years ago you would not have seen that. So I think in terms of the incremental steps that have been made, I think they have been made, and I think they are real.
On reflection, basically the Commissioner's Court today has got the same problems that the Commissioner's Court had 40 years ago.
As ugly as segregation was, it's something that doesn't need to be whitewashed and forgotten. It's something that we need to remember so that we don't repeat that. Not that we'll have drinking fountains segregated again, but we constantly have to look at, as a county, is our criminal justice system working for everyone? Does our social safety net work for everyone? Are we inadvertently discriminating against new minorities?
Everybody in the community does have a place at the table, does have a say, does have a part that they play in Dallas County of today. But then, what can we do better?
Every letter I've generated to the Young City Council is that try to understand the history.
When we talk about past, we still have a lot of future coming, and that's what we want to plan for. I mean, part of this project, in my opinion, is for the next generations to come. We're preserving history. In my opinion, nobody knows when you're going if you don't know where you came from.